having content on your website that is not accurate or up to date, certain forms, is a huge problem. So it's so easy to identify. It's so easy to fix. For instance, if you hand someone an ABN form that is expired, automatic, right? You cannot do that. So does it take much to get the new form? No, it takes 5 seconds to get that.
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and a revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Daniel Hirsch, a PT and the CEO of Risk and Compliance Analytics. Paul and Daniel talk through understanding and balancing your tolerance risk, the importance of spending a few extra dollars to protect your clinic, and the consequences of not having adequate insurance. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
When it comes to risk and really the tolerance of that, oftentimes I just like to say there's guardrails. You can't go this far to the right, you can't go this far to the left, but most of it is gray that you have to play in. And again, I'm not giving legal advice, of course, but the answer oftentimes is, well, what are you willing to tolerate? You know, if you live near the ocean, you need an umbrella policy, right? You need a flood insurance. You need certain things that are just going to let you sleep at night, but you don't have to. The truth is, if you don't have a mortgage, you don't need that. Or everything in life, right? It's all about what's your deductible? Where is your tolerance? What are you willing to accept onto yourself? Where in therapy, we don't really think of that. We think of, am I allowed to or am I not allowed to? And the answer is oftentimes, yes, there is what you should do. And there are rules and regulations that you're supposed to follow from a state and federal standpoint, and contractually, right? So people often forget you sign a contract when you're with a payer, a commercial payer. As a business owner, you really seem to be knowledgeable about that because you take all this time and energy to go through undergrad, graduate, get a doctorate level degree nowadays. And people are just acting as if it's just, you know what? I could just go into business. And the truth is, no, you need to be knowledgeable about the business side and understand, hey, by the way, you built this. Now let's protect it. I've said this before about like the whole, obviously the blind side, right? You get your quarterback. That's great, but you got to protect that this whole team environment that you're trying to protect. It's not just you. It's all your staff that you're trying to protect as well, and their licenses.
I imagine one of the interesting parts of your business is that you see practices all across that spectrum. And I think certainly I would bet you meet people that are totally unaware of the risks that they need to be covered for. They're just like so optimistic about entrepreneurship that they just forget that there's risk in this. But on the other hand, like, you know, when I think about those office hours, there's also probably stuff you've seen where you're like, oh, instant red flag or instant, hey, this is a topic we got to talk about. I know within the office hours, this particular one that stuck in my mind was when the topic of like number of codes per visit sort of came up. That was like, it definitely, I could tell you sat up because you weren't saying, hey, this is right or wrong, but you were like, oh, area we need to probably discuss. Are there other parts of the business that you look at as well, where you're like, oh, you know, I guess what I'm just trying to say, and I apologize, I'm not articulate today, but I do a lot of startup investing and I've been doing it now for almost 20 years. And I've sort of, for better or for worse, developed some heuristics where I know like if, you show me like somebody's business and probably in the first 3 or 4 minutes, I can identify a couple key areas that I'm going to want to dig in and investigate because I'm like, oh, I've seen problems like that before. So in your case, it seemed like the mix of CPT codes was certainly, or could be one of those areas, but are there other ones as well that you're like, hey, we need to dig into this more?
Yeah, to answer your question, the prior conversation was really operationally. So people were very definitive on how they feel and what they think is appropriate for operations, what works for them. And that's great because that's all about culture and their environment, which they should be. They should be confident about that. But when it comes to compliance, to your point, it's immediate. It takes about 3 questions and I immediately know, where are we going with this? Do we have to keep digging? And it's not like an IT audit, right? This is simply, do you have certain things in place, right? Let's just start from a foundational standpoint. Do you have certain things in place to allow yourself to be strategic? And that is everything under the sun for figuring out how to operate. How do you document? How do you protect, right? So what are your policies that you have? Just from a insurance standpoint, how do you deal with MIPS, or how do you deal with outcome reporting, and how do you deal with your EMR relationship, and how do you, right? So all these things that impact or influence a provider, think of it more like apps, right? Anything that they're
Right.
using to provide their service, I immediately address. If an owner is not able to just answer a simple question or two about the utilization of that function, then it's an automatic red flag. Hey, by the way, let's dig into this deeper. And to your point, documentation, coding, and billing is by far, and again, it's just from experience. It's an automatic. We know immediately if there's overutilization for re-evals or not understanding how to use group coding or how to use certain diversity of CPT codes is very evident very quickly.
This might seem like a dumb question, but in terms of those, like those three questions that you just sort of talked about, is there ever a point where there's like an online calculator for this, for people to start assessing their own risk?
There is. Yes. It starts with there is an IT risk assessment, which is great because that covers operations. It's a free service. And it's supposed to be done annually. So this is a great tool that people are supposed to use every single year. And the idea is it's not right or wrong. It's simply just do it. So you don't get scored. It's not a test. It's simply identify your areas. And it's mostly focused with operations and IT, but it really exposes everything because it asks about what you have in place. Have you thought about? So it's a great opening tool to open the dialogue and conversation. So again, it just highlights the ability for someone to say, and this is all covered entities. It's not unique to physical therapy.
So if we put aside the people that have no idea how much risk they've exposed themselves to, then I got to believe that the other folks that are not in that category are probably avoiding this topic because it just feels kind of hard. It just feels scary. It's kind of like you're walking through a minefield and you're like, oh God, I don't want to look under that rock. And if I don't look under that rock, there's nothing there. So that's really like these calculators get really interesting. In this case, like that test that you're talking about, like just letting people expose themselves in the privacy of their own little web session and then decide, where they really stand. Okay, so let's just maybe go broader here. I guess it's probably I feel like it's been a month since we last chatted. Any interesting stories? Obviously, don't tell us anybody's private info or anything like that, but within your own like client base or whatever, any interesting stories or gotchas that might be fun to talk about?
There's always a story, Paul. But to your point right now, I don't want to look. So I don't want to know. It's the same problem with my spider that's been on the window for 2 days. I don't want to look at it. I pretend it's not there, but I know it's about to jump out. So I'm gonna pretend it's not in existence. So the idea about auditing and compliance, people are, I think, just historically really worried about it because of their past experiences. It could be personal or with a different job position that they carried. And it's always been, I think, in a negative light. And that's part of the problem where, like right now, you're talking to me and it seems pretty normal, right? It's something that you could just deal with. It's not a problem. It's just things that you could easily manage if you just have resources and tools and just guidance. It's not that complicated. I always think of it as, I love the prevention model where it's simply, if you just do a couple simple things that cost a few dollars, you could easily prevent a nightmare scenario. And as an example, obviously, we know all the time about third-party audits right now. So everyone's being audited, Medicare, commercial payers, everyone's doing either a CPT code style, like individual, hey, by the way, I'm going to audit you for manual therapy, or just a blanket, let me just see 30 charts. And what we've seen, and there's one client right now where the challenge is that they're not considering the other variable that's involved. They're just looking at a dollar amount and saying, hey, by the way, we could tolerate a couple $100s that we have to pay back. That's not a problem. But it just took 8 people to deal for an entire week with this cleanup. I mean this in the nicest possible way, but like, it's just not a good return. That's just not really worth anyone's time because you just put an enormous amount of resources and energy, whatever the dollar amount is, wasted, that they could have been doing something fantastic, growing the business, doing something else, and it was completely stalled because someone just chose not to do what they were already supposed to do, right? And that's part of the problem, that people don't think of it like that. They think of it, well, it's okay, I could eat that cost. I could just deal with it and move on. It's like, no, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't have to. So that's part of my challenge. So that's not a great story, but that's just like, I guess, a segue into like another example of another case where someone's been dealing with relationships at work. So a lot of times there's training, obviously, that we're all required to do by state or whatever requirement. And you can easily do that, right? These trainings are all free. Harassment training, you don't have to pay for any of this stuff. And again, there's just no onboarding process. So preventable. And I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, now we're in trouble. Now we have legal fees. God knows what legal fees are an hour right now. In New York, what is it, $500 an hour? And it's a huge problem, right? And just something that all you have to do is demonstrate and prove that you took a reasonable action to limit this, just to show that you're demonstrating it and taking something meaningful and applying it to your business. That doesn't cost a dime. It may take an hour to do. I understand that. But the point is that it's so easily preventable. And now you have a whole firestorm that you're trying to put out. Now legal fees are involved. And it's really, I feel for it. I'm a therapist myself and I don't like waste. It's something terrible. We don't want to waste people's time. We don't want to waste energy. And we're just seeing this theme of, by the way, should we continue? Should we actually invest? Should we really buy that policy? And the answer is, well, it depends. But 9 out of 10 times, it's worth a few dollars on the front end to really prevent the issues going down.
Yeah. I mean, on a personal note, I totally agree. It's like, I would be happy to pay, a couple $100 a month or a year, depending on the specific types of coverage, just to sleep comfortably at night, not worrying about some neighbor's kid falling on my trampoline or, somebody in the business complaining about, how their departure was handled or something like that. But, I don't know, maybe I don't feel old. I'm only 43, but I feel like some of this stuff, you kind of just have to like experience the pain one time.
You know what? A therapist should know better. They really should, because I'll tell you, as a therapist, you can't be an effective therapist and be like, well, I haven't experienced an ACL injury, so I can't really treat you so effectively. And the answer is like, we should have the tools. And I mean, the profession, right? We should really have the tools to be able to identify this. And here's my frustration, that the industry in itself is really not conducive to bringing really, really effective tools and resources to bring everyone up to speed and level the playing field. It seems as if only people that have a certain level of EBITDA or a certain level of equity behind them could afford to do the right thing. And that it doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem like that's what the profession is intended to be. So it's hard to explain to a mom and pop that, hey, by the way, you don't have to compete with those publicly traded companies. You have to do what's meaningful for you. And how do you do that? There you go. A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Yeah. As an investor in a bunch of other startups and businesses and stuff like that, I guess I'm overly optimistic. It's like everybody can tell me the 87 ways something could go wrong. And I'm like, I just need to find the one thing that has to happen for it to succeed. And as I hear you talk about that, it sort of just tells me in the long term that there's probably opportunity for someone to create a better insurance product that is maybe easier to understand. It's kind of like for me as a driver of a vehicle that I own, at a high level, the coverage that Geico and Allstate and all these other, insurance companies provide is effectively the same to me. Now, if I were to read the paperwork, I'm sure there's different exclusions and stuff like that. But as a consumer, it's really just like they're all the same. But the only thing that differentiates one from the other is probably the brand and how I feel about it and the ease of which I can kind of interact with it. And like for me personally, it's not an endorsement like that. I just kind of chose Geico because it seems easy. I can use an app. They have great commercials, right? And I guess my point is, though, is that like sort of just makes me wonder in the long term if there's an opportunity for somebody to maybe squeeze in here a little bit and either create a new insurance company or become a better sort of marketing firm, almost like a direct-to-consumer marketing firm that speaks to more of these practices in a plain English kind of way. Because I don't think any rational practice owner would disagree with anything that we had to say when we talk about these stories. Like, hey, all it takes is one accusation from a patient. All it takes is one accusation from a former employee, and all your margins are gone for the year.
Right, but it doesn't seem real to people sometimes. And again, to your point, like it shouldn't have to take experience to know what an audit feels like.
Yeah. I was talking to one of our, I have a company I invested in that's not in the healthcare space, but they employ employees like anybody else. And this is about two weeks ago. And the founder called me and she said, hey, the good news is we're not in trouble. The bad news is all the profit's gone from last month. And I was like, okay, that seems alarming. What's up? Well, it turns out one of the employees that had recently left filed a claim, an unrightful, they basically claimed that the termination policy or the termination of their employment was based on age, gender, sex, something along those lines. And the point is, though, is that these things rarely go to court. They almost always get settled. And the settlement here was, even though the company knew they were right and they had the documentation to prove it, to go to court like that with the other side's attorney who is on a contingency fee, who's incentivized to litigate. It took $40,000 to make it go away. And so the founder was like really apologetic and all this stuff. I was like, why are you apologizing to me? And she says, well, I just, I should have gotten the insurance or whatever. And I was like, look, if I had told you 60 days ago that you should have this scenario covered with the insurance policy, you probably wouldn't have believed me. And both of us would have been frustrated with that call. But now you know.
Yeah, but the truth is, well, the definition is unforeseen. So you can't anticipate everything. And that's really what that type of insurance covers. We kind of, because we're in the health insurance field, we think insurance. But the truth is the products that we use now are intended to be used, right? So they're products of utilization as opposed to an unforeseen event that you would never really be covering, self-insuring for, right?
Right. And by the way, I know that was poorly articulated. I totally and wholeheartedly agree with your position that it should never come to this. Like people should know, that it makes more sense to pay up front. I think what I'm just trying to articulate poorly is this idea that, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to connect with these people. And this is maybe we're like diagnosing each other's businesses on the fly here in front of people listening to this thing, but I'll just use Strata as an example. Not that like we're pitching it here or anything like that, but when we started really doubling down on our own marketing efforts years ago, everybody within our company believes that people should collect 99% or 99.99% of what they're owed. Nobody disagrees with that fact. The problem, however, is that, potential clients either don't know what their real reimbursement rate is, or it's easier to kind of stick their heads in the sand and sort of pretend they're getting it, And so one of the tactics we ended up using, I think from a high level strategy standpoint, was really just, let's just talk loudly about this topic. And inevitably, the people that are open to this idea will then sort of drift towards us and engage more. And the people that don't care or totally disagree will go away. And I think in many ways, that's kind of like probably what should happen in this conversation like we're having. And I'll just be very direct and candid with you. I mean, you and I have no business relationship together, and I want to say that to the audience, right? But I think that, I can agree with you that most people don't want to talk about this topic, even though they should. Most people shouldn't even be in a position to like have a financial sort of meltdown because they didn't get covered. But I think the best thing we can do is just talk loudly about the topic. And hopefully the people that are just on the fringes and open to this idea will then get attracted to this. And on the flip side, the people that don't care or don't want to believe it, they can go away. Because even though you and I have no business relationship, I will say the one thing that where I have a common interest with you is that if we look at our own customer base in terms of the churn, the customers that leave us, I think last year we had 12 clients leave us. 80% of those clients either retired or just closed their business because of age and that sort of thing. And then the remaining, 20% closed because of a financial, like they just the numbers didn't work. And it was probably because of one of these unforeseen circumstances. It just blew them out of the water. And it's sad to see that. Like I can't do anything about that first 80%, but that other 20%, that's where it's like kind of sad. And that's where I think we have like a mutual interest here.
I appreciate you saying that. And we've spoken a couple of times. It's really, it comes down to a place of, I really believe deep down that it doesn't matter if you use your EMR, my service, as long as the message is getting out, to your point, that at least people are thinking about this and making knowledgeable decisions about how they're going to grow and help. Because again, it's the pool. We all are in this together, and everyone's insurance is going to go up if all of a sudden all their, they're starting to have claims again. Where's the loss run? Like HBSO, they own half the market share just on insurance, right? So their message when they put out, information every year is you have to listen to it. They're really telling you a story about what's happening behind the scenes. And just like to your point, you're putting out all this great, fantastic data, and other EMRs may like it, they may not like it, but I think it's fantastic for the industry. So people could, as they're entering or as they're transitioning, they can say, hey, by the way, how does this impact me? What do I need to do? Is there something else I'm not considering? Because I'm really good. I haven't met many therapists who are just like, my skills are like, right? People think that they're good. We have really great therapists in this country that are very highly educated, but yet from a business standpoint, why is everyone suffering? Why are so many people really struggling? And the answer is you need a roundtable. I think of it like that, right? You need a roundtable of experts that you don't have to be the expert of everything. But the truth is I have my go-to. So I have my counsel when I need my counsel. I have my finance when I need my finance. I have my coach when I need my coach, right? Like you need resources that you could count on and that are reliable and that are immediate. You need immediate answers sometimes that are just going to guide you and allow you to make better decisions, as opposed to just saying, I know everything, I could do everything. Because even me as a resource to others, I have my resources too, because sometimes you can't know everything. Even from an orthopedic standpoint, I have my Dutton book sitting on the shelf because it's not possible to remember everything. So it's one of those messages that it really benefits everyone if people are talking about it. And I could care less if someone uses one of the competition. Great, go for it. It helps everybody.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. I was talking to, from the office hours, I was talking to Justin Stiver earlier this morning, actually. And he mentioned something very similar, that, these sorts of conversations aren't happening out in the open. They should be, but they're either not happening at all, or they're happening at some, private dinner after 2 beers because nobody really wants to talk about it publicly. He gave me one example of he said he had emailed, so he's part of a reputable PT industry organization. And he gave this example of how he asked a question in their email list, and then it immediately got squashed because you're not supposed to talk about these sorts of topics, and so anyway, the point is, it sort of echoes what you just said there as well, is that I think these conversations need to happen more often, and I think need to happen more openly as well. I don't know if we're doing the office hours right. I don't know if our content's right, but I do know that we're trying to kind of make these conversations happen more in the open and then see what people do. So,
and again, my perspective is I totally understand that people and owners are trying to survive. That's the environment. People are trying to survive first, and then they're trying to thrive. But what people forget is you can't do either. If A, you're not in business, or you're going out of business because you forgot to do something critical. So all this momentum and focus of, let me just put out the fire in front of me. The trick is, don't have those fires. It's easy enough. It's cheap enough out there now that you don't have to waste and burn through all this capital, if you will, to figure these things out. And that's my message, that people should really go down the page on Google. Keep looking for something that makes sense for you. Because again, if it's me, you, someone else, there are resources out there. And it's a great thing that people should be able and knowledgeable to say, hey, by the way, I know where to look, right? We're very proud of that as therapists, being like, you know what? We know where to look. We know where to find answers, but yet we're choosing not to in this space. It seems so counterintuitive. So that's kind of we're willing to do anything evidence-based.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But what about the healthier business? By the way, when Ben asked Justin about his tax write-off, I was like, don't answer that. Don't answer. He's like, do you write off on your taxes? I was like, oh.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you that he probably shouldn't answer, but I love that he did, because I think that the fact is that people are wondering those things. And I think we can disclaim away a bunch of the risk there of answering that question. But I think that I certainly don't want more risk associated with my show or my business at all. But at the same time, if we can mitigate those risks or disclaim them away and at least allow the conversation to happen, I think it forces people to think. Because I would much rather somebody else kind of say, wait a second, should I do that? And then go talk to their CPA about it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, the disclaimers do they do the work.
I'm going to armchair quarterback your industry for a moment. I think that it's very similar to ours in the sense that storytelling, I think, is ultimately what might help break through the indifference. Because I don't think there's people out there that are like, oh, I hate insurance, I'm never going to buy insurance. I think it's actually the indifference that sometimes is disguised as fear, or it's disguised as they don't even know they have to do. But the point is, it's indifference because they're not paying attention to this. And you kind of alluded a few minutes ago to I think a story about interpersonal relationships, which I sort of interpreted that as maybe sexual harassment or something like that. And I think those are the kind of stories, without naming names, that are really interesting to tell people. And I'll give you one example, by the way, on a personal note for our business. Every week, I get at least 3 to 5, cold emails from private equity people. And so once a week I try to just pick one of them at random and talk to them for 30 minutes and just kind of get a sense of the market and what they're doing and what they see interesting. Inevitably, all of them bring up one common thread. They're like, hey, Paul, how come you guys don't do self-serve sign up on your product? Let people sign up for a free trial or whatever. And then I have to kind of say the same thing, which is look, it's more than just that. We have to also vet whether or not we want to work with a client. And I almost always tell them this one story about how we had a practice. They had been with us for a while. We were processing everything just fine. Our technology was handling all their billing just fine. Everything was just fine. And all of a sudden, denials started coming back. And we're like, what in the world is this? Well, turns out Mr. Practice Owner had been getting a little too intimate with some of his clients. And all it took was a couple accusations. They don't, and everything gets put on hold. I guess the point is that that's where I think those are the stories that I think people don't hear enough about, that like all it takes is an accusation or two. Now, obviously, first of all, don't do bad things. That should be the rule. Don't do bad things. But beyond that, I think it should also be like, don't allow yourself to be put in a position where an accusation, for example, could screw up what you've worked so hard to build. I wish there was a way someday for us to create like almost like an anonymous, scary stories like file folder or something like that, because I don't know how else to get across to people that you have to have insurance.
To your point, that may be happening after 2 beers on round table somewhere. They're talking about
it certainly is, yeah.
And there is, the truth is, there are unlimited stories. It's nonstop. There's always something that happens. And I can tell you personally that it's a two-way street. I reserve the right to not work with a client if I feel like, ethically speaking, there's a problem, right? Or just the judgment of somebody where what they're describing is, this is not going to be a good match, just based on who they are. And that's okay. We should be able to do that in every aspect of our lives. Say, hey, by the way, this is not going to be a good relationship. Not only does it always cause additional issues, but, our gut is usually right. It's not like we don't usually make
Correct.
bad decisions. And I think that's part of the challenge where business owners, again, to the point that we've been saying, like they really are trying to figure it out. And the point is everything's going up in price. Everything's going up in price. And yet therapy owners cannot increase their costs of service. How is that possible? In what logical world does that make sense? And the answer is it doesn't. So what are you going to do about it? And the answer is you need different strategies. You need different lines of service. You need different waivers. You need different skill sets, right? To be able to appropriately expand. Personally, I was using HyperIce. I love that device. Fantastic. I have nothing to do with them. I just happen to like their products.
Yep.
And I was like, you know what? I need a waiver. I don't have a waiver for this. This is crazy. How do I not? I could totally blow out someone's knee doing this. It was like, of course, we need that. We need that immediately. So like, these are the types of things where it's just natural for us to just constantly be thinking, how else can we add content without increasing price? It's just simple, right? We just want people to have what they need without nickeling and diming and all this kind of nonsense and strategies, where I think that's just what people are used to. And that's why they get a bad taste in their mouth, that they're just like, I'm just trying to be taken for a ride. And people are like, you know what? Let me just focus on what I want to deal with. The person sitting in front of me on the plinth. And I could do that. I could deal with that because that's what I'm really good at.
You talked about waivers, like this idea, the product you just talked about. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't have a waiver for this. What are those like common sort of documents that are usually missing, like those little gaps where people don't realize that, like that waiver is a great example of like, you probably thought everything was all good until you realize like, wait a second, there could be somebody that says that device hurt me and now I'm party to the lawsuit. Like, what are the other ones there?
Like, Paul, it was literally my friend, like someone sitting on my sofa and I was like, you're great, but I need you to sign because
that's right.
I didn't do a medical review on you. I have no idea, but like, I just don't need that, right? It's so easy to prevent. Here, 3 seconds later, we're good. So to answer your question, it is 100%, even the panel that we had, not calling out names or anything, because I would never do that. Having content on your website that is not accurate or up to date, certain forms, is a huge problem. So it's so easy to identify. It's so easy to fix. For instance, if you hand someone an ABN form that is expired, automatic, right? Automatic. You cannot do that. So does it take much to get the new form? No, it takes 5 seconds to get. But like, why should everyone figure that out, right? It should just be an automatic. Right. APTA, boom, here's your new ABN form. So these are the things that I think about all the time. I'm like, how can we make things accessible to people that they do not have to think about anymore? Consent forms, to your point, notice of privacy practices, something that we've never thought about for years, right? We always have the same thing hanging up on the wall. Who cares, right? It's the same. It changed. It finally changed. Who's updating it? No one. No one even thought to update it yet. And the answer is, of course you need to update it. Of course, we're going to have a new version of it. Just take it, just download it, put it up. And those are the things. So like waivers, to your point, like anything that is cash based, we love dealing with. So anytime people are like, how can I be more creative with my business? You want to do cash? Here, let's create something specific to you. And it could be anything under the sun. And the idea is you have to first know what it is, create it, design it, and then you're good to go. And again, it's not rocket science, Paul. This is just something that is just part of doing business that you have to think, am I protecting myself before I'm touching that patient?
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.